This is the PvE Retribution build. I rarely use this because I usually pick up Repentance, but in most situations you don't actually need Repentance. So I decided I need to cover PvE Ret because I probably get the most questions about it, and I mean the lack of information about it is kind of disgusting to me. So I'll start with some of the most broad general things I think that need to be covered. First is I'll go over some cons to going PvE Ret, and then I'll go over the good news about it, I guess. Okay, first con I would have to say is Holy Holy Paladin, probably one of the best PvE classes in the game. Definitely have a utility and raid and have purpose. And okay, so you're not playing that, but part of the problem is one of the major reasons to bring a holy paladin or a paladin at all is for the blessings. And really, retribution doesn't really bring uh, new blessings to the raid. Like you can actually say a prot pally is okay because at least you get blessing of sanctuary. So that kind of sucks. Let's see what else. The second big con would have to be positioning on a lot of boss fights. So I'm going to use Ragnaros for example. There's literally only space for one retribution on Ragnaros, and that spot could probably be used by a Holy Pally technically just as efficiently. So there's several fights because of the mechanics. There just really isn't a great place for a Retribution Paladin in raids on a lot of bosses. Okay, now the last big con I can think about Retribution Paladin. Actually, I thought of another one, so I'm going to go ahead and do 4. But the next thing is um, you'll never really be as high DPS as a well-played Fury Warrior or Rogue. And it's kind of interesting because like on the fights that Rogues and Fury Warriors do bad, you do better, but then mages and warlocks do better. Like Retribution Paladin seems like it's always in that second tier. And people are going to say, oh, it's like third or fourth tier, but I'll get to that later because actually it's almost always in the second tier. And that's interesting about Ret Paladins. So you're like never really the most optimal. And as Retribution Paladins can pretty much use gear, spell power gear, any type of gear really, they're always going to be taking gear from the top classes. Okay, so the worst thing, the absolute worst thing in my opinion about Retribution PvE in raiding, not really dungeons, is how expensive it is. It is so goddamn expensive in terms of gold. And here's why. It's easy to break down. Okay, so like a Fury Warrior, you pretty much just have to get all the consumes for a melee. Maybe you have to get a flask. Maybe there's certain bosses you need a flask of Titans for AoE. Kinda debatable. The thing about PvE Retribution that is so horrid is you have to get pretty much a flask every week, all melee consumables, so mongoose, I don't even, I mean, blasted land buffs, the juju powers, these kind of things. Whatever, strength food. And then you have to get all caster consumables. So, ouch, spell flask. And then you have to get some consumables that no one else even has to use, like shadow oil. And you should even get shadow power if you're getting shadow oil. Ugh, and then you have to have mana pots. Like literally like 50 mana pots a raid. I mean, not major manas. And then you also need to farm demonic runes and night breaths. Now, here's the thing. To be fair to the Ret Paladin, a lot of people says, "Oh, well, it's only because you have all these consumes that you can beat my hunter consistently. You can beat, you're beating warlocks and MC, not Nax, but you're beating lots of classes on the damage meter that these other classes they think they do more damage than you, but they won't. You will actually out DPS them." And then they'll start shit talking about how many consumes you're using, but okay, but you can't, as that class, you can't use those consumes. They don't do anything for you. So if there's a bunch of consumes that only have value to the Ret Paladin, that doesn't actually decrease what Ret Paladin's top end is. However, to really play a Ret Paladin correctly, you have to, I mean, it's like 300 gold a week, because another thing you have to consider is, unlike Fury, which can actually PvP some, etc., like a lot of builds kind of work okay in PvP and you can raid with them, Ret PvE is pretty much garbage. Now there's Ret PvP, but it's different enough that you really shouldn't be taking it to raid. So you probably have to respect. I think there is ways you can walk the line, especially if you have a holy paladin in your guild who already has improved blessing of might. Maybe you don't have to get that, but then again, I would probably get improved blessing of might anyways, just for Ret PvP over benediction. So I don't even know if that example really works. The point is, you're probably gonna have to respec. You're probably gonna have to farm all consumes for casters and melee. There's always gonna be a flask for you to be using that will be useful. And you'll have to get some off-ball stuff like shadow oil that no one else has to buy, which is actually pretty expensive. So in my opinion, this more than anything is what keeps me from playing Ret in PvE. Okay, after ragging on Ret for like 10 minutes or something, I'm going to start saying some of the cool things about Retribution. Okay, here's the good news about Retribution. If you really want to do it, and you want to put in the time and the effort, it really will do acceptable DPS. And it's not just Elysium. Certain builds are better on different servers. Spell Power Ret is going to be better on most private servers that give too much basically, Improved Righteous Fury is bugged on a lot of servers. But then Command's better on this server. It's more like vanilla. So one way or another, it's actually pretty viable. Even if you're not playing on Elysium, there's ways to make Ret viable. But you have to, like I said, put all that time and dedication. It's really a dedicated thing. But man, you do a lot more damage than people think, and you will compete a lot better than people think. And like oftentimes on the fights that, like, you're never going to be in last place. It's this weird thing where Rets are always in between AoE classes and single target classes. So you will kind of be at least always medium useful. Now, what is nice about that? There's a few things. There's items in the game that really only work on Ret Paladins, and I've noticed with a lot of these high-end guilds that do speedruns, one of their, in my opinion, the problem with that, which it's good for speedruns and it's what you should do for speedruns, but it's not. Casual guilds shouldn't copy speedrunning guilds. And what I mean by that is like a speedrunning guild's gonna have like 10 warriors or something in Molten Core and like 12 rogues and like almost no casters. And then by the time they get to Nax, they need like 12 warlocks. Well, that kind of sucks for loot distribution. If you're clearing all the content in a casual guild, and you're keeping more classes, so you have like a random Ret Pally, random Shadow Priest, a random Moonkin, it helps a lot with a lot of the weird random ass drops. And in a weird way, it makes it so our warriors, like in our casual guild, Raid 3, actually have pretty good gear because they don't have to compete with 10 other warriors. So now in a hardcore guild where they're speedrunning, your warriors will have rank 14 anyways. So it's just different. Like what is effective is different. And having in a casual guild, I do believe it is well worth it to have these kind of janky specs because it really helps with the loot distribution. And the damage from a Ret Pally, I've said for like the 4th time now, but I'll keep reading because it's important. It is actually good. It's always in that lower 2nd tier in any part of the game, really, oddly enough. And I think this kind of goes without being said, but I didn't say it directly yet. I think even in a casual guild, there is no place for more than one Ret Paladin in a 40-man group. I do think in a casual guild, it is efficient to have that. And you guys that watch S-Fan's channel, he does actually take loot from Fury Warriors. He's the guild master, and I support that because of the work he puts into it. But technically, I think you shouldn't be taking loot from Fury Warriors first. It should be going to the Fury Warriors first, and then going to the Ret Paladin, in my opinion. But S-Fans, you know, he puts a lot in. He deserves what he gets, and you know, that's fine with me. I understand why that is the way that it is. So, but even if Paladin's taking gear that warriors might want, something to consider is Fury Warriors and Ret Paladins still want pretty different gear. So even if you have a Ret Paladin, there actually isn't that much overlap in what they want. So it's very, what you can do is give the plus hit gear, so like chromatic boots, for example, always go to Fury first, and then the Ret Pally could get something like Fallen Crusader or maybe one of the earlier pieces of what's it called? Whatever, the BWL pauldrons, the red ones with the claws. They don't have any hit chance. So like, I mean, oddly enough, there really isn't even that much crossover because Ret Pallys need like almost no hit chance. Pretty much for Ret Paladins, you probably can get away with like Ani necklace, Don Julio's, and Lionheart helm, precision, and then your human skill, and you're pretty much done. And if you're not human or you're worried about your judgment that's missing, you could just pick up like True Strike shoulders. So like literally, you don't need like the gear that the Fury Warriors usually want the most. You don't even need as a Ret Paladin, in my opinion. Okay, so another thing about Ret PvE paladins is their damage in 5-mans is really, really good, and their usefulness is really, really good, and it's terribly frustrating to see people not taking paladins to 5-mans. It's so retarded. A lot of people that have been watching Esfand and I play and read some of our earlier guides have done what we said, and I've asked them, like, hey, how was doing your dungeons? How was it getting your light forge? And they all say they top the meters all the time. And I'm going to give you a few reasons for this. So, one thing that really helps a Ret Paladin 5-mans is the targets are stunnable, so command does double damage. Boom, that's a big deal. Then there is the fact that a lot of it is undead, helps a little bit, but there's also a lot of silences, so I'm not going to say that's a huge plus, but it is a minor plus. Because any dungeon with undead also has a bunch of annoying silences. So, but still, I think ultimately it still helps that there's so much undead PvE content. Um, that's huge. Let's see. Oh yeah, so one of the things that sucks about 40-man raids is Ret is that holy paladins are so efficient that there's no reason to bring a Ret for another blessing. You could just have another holy paladin with that blessing. However, in a 5-man, my freaking blessings are amazing, and if you got a, who cares if your healer and tank are already paladins? You take a third paladin, you have 3 blessings. That's freaking awesome. I mean, the blessing, like if a rogue is doing a little more damage than you, but you gave everybody in the group a blessing, then you actually did more than the rogue did. So, oh god, it's infuriating when people think that paladins shouldn't be in 5-man. And just like paladins' base damage is actually really high. Like one of the things that helps us in MC compete with harder scaling, like if you get 100 attack power, it'll do more on a Fury Warrior than it will on a Ret Pally. But in Molten Core, we have the alternative that we can also get spell power buffs. So in a weird way, we actually end up getting the same from buffs almost as some of these harder scaling class, almost. But in dungeons, when it's a little bit more closer to the base damage, like Consecration doesn't scale very much and stuff, like you early game, you just do more damage than Fury Warriors. Like I consistently beat my entire guild, not raid 3, but when I was like in End, I'd get invited to UBRS runs with them when the server first came out, and I would often be like first or second DPS, and they would still be like, people would be condescending to me and being like, oh, whatever, this bullshit, Ret does no damage. It's like, bitch, I'm like in first place, I have shit gear, I'm in Light Forge, suck it. So I guess when a Ret Paladin is worse is when you're in a 5-man that everybody massively outgears the dungeon, and there's not as many buffs, so you have to be selective. Like, okay, I'm a Ret Paladin, I want might, for example, but like, so you don't get the variety of buffs. So the buffs that you do get help the classes that are more focused on one thing. Like a Fury Warrior, for example, is a good example. He'll get more out of Might than a Ret Pally will, but then you won't get all the other buffs. So that's when their damage looks the lowest, I guess, is when you're fighting, you're in a 5-man and you're next to a guy in full tier 2, like Rogue or something. His damage should smoke yours. But if we're talking like uh, Shadowcraft versus Lightforge, and you're stunning the target and stuff, and yeah, like you'll probably do as well as the rogue if you if you build your guy correctly, which most people don't. That's another problem, is there's so many Ret Paladins building incorrectly that people don't even know what the hell is going on when one Ret Pally builds correctly. But yeah, like early on, 5-man, fucking take the Ret Pallies. They're good. They're like better than whatever you're gonna bring. They're better than the Warlock. They're better than the Rogues. So let me summarize what I'm saying because there's a lot of nuance to this and people could easily misinterpret it. Dungeon geared level Rogue does about as much damage as like a Lightforged Knicker Paladin. The Knicker, the weapon. Yet the Paladin can buff other people, the Rogue can blind, so they're pretty equal, but don't refuse Ret Pallies if you're wanting to clear like DM West. However, if you're like trying to just do a DM North because you're just trying to get buffs for that night's raid and everyone's going to be in tier 2, tier 2 offset Pally will be greatly outperformed by a tier 2 equivalent rogue. But here's the cool thing. By the time you get to that level of gear, if you really want to do mad DPS in dungeons, you switch the AoE return damage prot. The damage is so insane, and there is some recordings of me kind of showing this off out there on the internet. Like if you look at me and S-Fan's live Strath Live run where we 3-manned it with Spoogie, I did more. I mean, S-Fan's a really good Ret Paladin, Ret PvE Paladin. He's better than me. He has more practice at it. So in the same gear, I'd probably outperformed by him. But running with Lawbringer, all defense accessories, like literally no spell power almost, Edward the Odd, and Force Reactive Disc, I did more damage than he did at Strat Live. So by the time you get to tier 2 and you massively outgear the dungeon anyways, if your goal is to impress people and do damage, learn how to return damage prot. But we're talking about what Ret's good at, and Ret is good at early game dungeon DPS when everyone has shit gear. Now I can see how logically people think as far as rating goes, based on what I said about how we may not scale as well in Blackwing Layer as some other classes, that we're going to fall off by really hard by time AQ and insanely hard by Nax. But I'm going to tell you why that isn't true. Actually, it stays about the same. It never really gets worse than it is in Blackwing Layer, and Blackwing Layer might actually be your worst point because the gear is not well optimized for rating. However, AQ40 you get a huge boost with tier 2.5, and in Nax you get a ginormous boost once again with being able to use Exorcism on like all the mobs, and if it's a big AoE pool, you can cast Holy Wrath, and I mean that's kind of a big deal. And then just the tier 2.5 and how Crusader works plus Holy Water and things like that, you don't lose that much by the time you go to Nax. So the disparity you feel in Blackwing Layer is pretty much the same disparity you will feel all the way through all the dungeons. Anyways, this hopefully cleared up some of the expectations on Retribution and PvE. It's viable, it's just hard work. Anyways, Deus Vult, good luck.